afternoon, everyone. If you can hear me and see me clearly and my presentation is also clear on your end, kindly click the thumbs up button so that I can see a show of hands. Okay, thank you so much for the response. So based on the response, it seems that I'm good to go. Welcome to Adaptive Design for Learning, LX Learning Exchange 2021. As Sir Ryan has said, I am Sir Jason Tahores from the Ateneo de Davao University. So I work with the senior high school unit primarily and um, also with the college unit in the physics department of Ateneo de Davao University School of Arts and Sciences. And so the topic that I pitched when I was asked by the institute was the power of conversations. And this particular topic has a special place in my online teaching and learning experience in the past couple of years because it has created the greatest impact um, when it comes to eliciting the engagement that we want when it comes to the online learning experience of our students. So to start off, let's begin with my context. So where do I come from as a sharer for this particular session? So I am Sir Jason. I've been teaching General Physics 1 and 2, Earth Science and Disaster Readiness and Risk Reduction among grade 12 STEM students here in Ateneo de Davao University Senior High School. And I also teach physics for engineers in the college unit. I was the former academic administrator for these subjects, so I had the opportunity to lead my cluster towards the desired outcome of the university and our unit in responding to the challenges of online learning experiences laid forth by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so as a cluster leader, I was tasked to think about and reflect on the different ways in which we can improve the experience of our students, even if we are isolated in our own homes. So as cluster leader, I had the opportunity to lead my cluster in the face-to-face setting in 2018, 2019, and then the pandemic came in 2019 and 2020, where we facilitated online and modular settings. So in the 2 years that I served as the academic administrator, I had the some sort of balance between the traditional way of delivering the lessons and the novel way of delivering the lessons through online and modular settings. And so this gave me the, shall we say, the experience of how to pinpoint, experience on how to pinpoint certain aspects of the traditional setting that we have to, or that we need to carry with us in the online setting, and which aspects requires a rethinking. And as I go along later on, you will see what I'm talking about. And so, as I said, I work as a curriculum developer and instructional designer for the subjects under my cluster, physics, earth science, and BRRR. And so as the curriculum developer, I was tasked to translate the most essential learning competencies by the Department of Education and weave it with the vision, mission, and goal of our unit, and in particular, the university. As an instructional designer, I was tasked to design the online learning experience of the students, from the assessments to the presentations prepared by my colleagues, and other aspects that requires weaving and integration. And so when we brainstormed about the possible challenges, so the context is year 2019, and we were thinking about the year 20, yeah, it was the year 2020, and then we were thinking about how we can mitigate the challenges presented by online classes. So we listed down the notable problems in online classes. Of course, the access to devices. Not all students have reliable internet connections as well, and devices that are optimal for the online learning experience. We also thought of the existence or non-existence of dedicated learning spaces in their homes that are free from environmental and digital distractions. We also have, of course, the perennial problem of complacency and procrastination on the end of the student. The learning management system, or LMS, issues as well. Not all of us are digital natives, and so it is quite challenging for our faculty members and our cluster mates to adapt to the requirements of the LMS, kasi maraming mga changes and complicated settings doon sa Moodle natin na LMS. We also have screen time during synchronous sessions. As you probably already know, as teachers now teaching in the online setting, we have to limit the screen time of our students so that they don't experience eye strains, they don't exhibit they don't exhibit um, unhealthy um, unhealthy issues dito sa sa kanilang mga body, sa kanilang eyes, sa kanilang mental health, and so on. So we have to um, include that in our designing process. So how long do we want the students to stay at the computer screens? And of course, the late submission or non-submission of formative assessment is again sa mga problema natin, and a lot more. Marami pa tayong problema na hindi natin na-include dito sa list na ito. And so with the plethora of the problems that are at our table, we ask ourselves, where do we begin? Saan ba tayo magsisimula in addressing the problems? Because whether we like it or not, we really have to embrace the possibility of an online learning setup, whether the learners are unable to, whether the learners are not on the same footing when it comes to technological resources, or whether the learners are physically or mentally unprepared to enter the classroom. If they are willing to journey with us in the online setup, it is also a given that we also guide them and make sure that the experience is optimal on their end. So hindi naman talaga natin pwedeng sabihin na bawal kang pumasok dito sa school, bawal kang pumasok sa Ateneo de Davao University Senior High School kasi wala kang computer, kasi mabagal internet connection. No, we don't want that. As long as a learner is capable of going above the challenges of his or her resources, we accept him or her. And we try to design our online learning experience so that we can cater to all of the students as much as possible. So where do we begin? In looking at the when looking at the problems that we have to address, we have to prioritize. We had this prayer in mind, so the prayer of serenity, and I know you're familiar with this one, being from Jesuit schools. So the serenity to accept the things that we cannot change, the courage to change the things that we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And so with this prayer in mind, we ask ourselves these two questions. What are the things that we cannot change, and what are the things that we can change? Ano yung mga problema that are beyond our control, and what are the aspects that are within our control? So of course, we began to separate things accordingly. So what are the things that we cannot change? Of course, we cannot change the quality of the internet connection, just beyond the scope of the school. We cannot provide them, we cannot give them better computers if their computers are not that good. We also cannot give them personal learning spaces at their homes, and we also cannot totally remove the distractions at home when they are in our online classes. So those are just some of the things that are beyond our control. But what are the things that are within our control? What are the things that we can change? So we can, of course, make our online learning experience dynamic, lively, interactive, and meaningful. And in doing so, we somehow help our students to adjust accordingly to the requirements of the online learning setup. So the online learning experience becomes less of a chore, less of a challenge, and more of an opportunity for the students to develop this setup at the particular sets of skills that we want them to develop, but in an online setting. Some say that it is impossible kasi yan talaga yung limitations ng online learning spaces natin. Obviously, we cannot do face-to-face interactions. We cannot see the non-verbal cues of our students, but we live with that limitation. We just can't neglect that limitation, so we accept that. And so with that limitation, with those limitations at our disposal, what then can we do? And so with this particular question in mind, we turned into a practice that is being that has been done in our university for quite some time. So the concept of pakikihinabi, or conversation in English. So pakikihinabi as a form of seminar or a session is particularly interesting because it brings together people from different backgrounds and put them in a table or in a room and have them talk what they want to say about this particular issue, not necessarily to solve this issue, but to hear what the other has to say. So this concept of a conversational session really struck with us because we haven't really considered this model of delivering our lessons in teaching physics, in teaching earth science, and teaching disaster readiness and risk reduction. Because as you all know, if you're a science teacher, we are more focused on delivering the content. We are more focused on giving the students the content and for them to digest the content or synthesize the content on their own. And so this idea of turning it into a conversation is quite novel for a physics and earth science teacher. And so we tried to explore this setup last year in the second semester of academic year 2019-2020. And we found out that it's actually quite effective. The responses of the students were positive. We can see from their student evaluations that they really appreciated the change that we made in our synchronous session. So for context, you have 1 hour synchronous session for each subject every week. So you have 2 hours of asynchronous or A mode and 1 hour of synchronous mode or S mode. So we talk to our students through Google Meet. And in the 1 hour synchronous session, we prioritize human connections. So what do you mean by prioritizing human connections? How do you prioritize human connections in a digital setup? In a classroom where the student is the center of the learning experience, or in a constructivist classroom, the teacher must strive, of course, to develop a strong and meaningful relationship with the learners. But even in the face-to-face or traditional setup, this is easier said than done, more so in the virtual setup. So how do you establish that human connection? How do you make the student trust you as a teacher? And how do you trust a student as a learner or as a student of your particular subject, that he will do what needs to be done in the subject? And so that is a particularly challenging question, and that is something that you alone can answer. So you have to overcome this hesitation that the students might find you corny in initiating a conversation, or that the students might not be as cooperative as you want them to be. But when you overcome that hesitation, you would be surprised with the results of the online learning experience that comes about. So establishing a strong relationship between teachers and learners is challenging, especially to subjects like physics, chemistry, biology, or the hard sciences, and any other science actually that require the students to attain a particular objective knowledge or enhance a particular set of skills. And so one of the first questions that come into our mind when we talk about designing a synchronous session around the idea of conversation is this: do we even have the time to talk about the relevance of the subject in the real world? So how do you bring all of these learnings in the classroom into the real world? Do you even have the time when the students are even confused with the subject itself, or the objective knowledge that you have to attain for this particular subject? Another question would be, how can we extend the discussion beyond the confines of the classroom, since the students might get confused even more? So there's this hesitation. Diba kapag nilagyan na natin ng connection with other subjects, o nilagyan na natin ng connections with the real world, baka mas lalong ma-confuse yung mga students natin. And another question would be, necessary ba talaga na i-connect yung mga concepts natin sa science with mathematics, with the art, with history, or with philosophy, when in fact we can just tell the students to search it online during their free time? So these questions are very valid questions, and these questions are challenging, particularly challenging to answer, because it stems from the fact that we have been looking at our online learning experience as some sort of curatorship work. So if you are a curator of knowledge, you just pick which knowledge you want to include in your LMS or include in your lesson activity. And then whenever there are questions that students might want to raise during your class that are beyond the scope of the subject, you just tell them, okay, you can search it on your own and share it to the class in the next meeting. Or if you are a particularly enthusiastic teacher, you can talk it in front of the class. But again, there is this limitation of time. You don't have all of the time in the world. And so you have to balance it out. How do you make a session out of a conversation model that caters to the majority of the students, and not just to that one student that asked the particular question? So that is a question that needs to be answered by the school or by the unit, because it varies from subject to subject. The leveraging of the nature of the subject is very important, because each subject has his or her own strengths and weaknesses, and by leveraging on the strength of the subject and by leveraging on the importance of the subject in the real world or its connection with other subjects, then you are making the learning experience even more dynamic and lively. And so, to give you an example, in our case, in Ateneo de Davao University Senior High School, we wanted to hit many birds in one stone by designing our synchronous session around the idea of having conversations. And so these are the goals that we want to attain in designing conversational sessions. We establish a strong connection with the learners during the very limited time that we have during synchronous sessions, because it has been a tried and tested activity and a tried and tested engagement or initiative, that when a teacher has a strong connection with the student and the student has a strong connection with the teacher, then the learning becomes even more effective and more efficient. And so we want to develop that connection with our students with this conversational model. We also engage the learners to think deeply. So by giving them, by throwing at them thought-provoking questions that not only requires basic understanding of the concept, but also requires them to think beyond the confines of the classroom and see if meron ba talagang connection with the real world. We also want them to encourage. We also encourage them to challenge their own knowledge. And by asking these questions and throwing these questions at them, they're also challenging what they know. They are looking at the holes in their understanding, and in trying to answer these questions, well, they can fill the gaps of their knowledge, and the teacher can come into play as well. If there are misconceptions or gaps in the knowledge, then the teacher can fill in, okay, during the synchronous session. And of course, you want to enhance the appreciation of the subject while also strengthening their knowledge of it. When we talk about bringing the knowledge out of the classroom and into the real world, you are actually establishing a connection between the theoretical and the practical, the conceptual and the real. And in doing so, you are enhancing what the student has learned in the class or inside the learning spaces, and telling them that you really can bring your knowledge out into the real world when you try to do so, when you just try it out. And so, how do you particularly do, how did we do it in our case? So we designed our synchronous sessions, I said earlier, around challenging and thought-provoking questions. In our case, we have weekly PowerPoint presentations, and in each weekly PowerPoint presentations, you have yes, we have 5 questions, thought-provoking questions. Yes, Sir Eugenio, do you want to share po? Okay. So we designed this thought-provoking questions na, and throw to what we call resource speakers. So we identified 5 students in the class a week prior, and we told them that you will be the resource speakers for next week. And so when I ask a question, you will be answering these questions. It's more of a planned oral recitation. So in this case, the student will not be intimidated or will not dread going into class because he or she might be anxious about being called as one of the respondents, no, doon sa ating sessions. But instead, we tell them na, okay, you will be speaking in front of your classmates next week. So you have to prepare and learn as much as you can so that you can answer the questions. But we also tell them that if you cannot answer the question, that's okay, because I will be here, the teacher will be there to ask follow-up questions until you arrive at the right answer. And so it really becomes a conversation. You challenge what the student knows, and you eventually lead them to the correct answer if they got it wrong the first time, or if they got it right at first try. Then you can ask follow-up questions and strengthen their understanding of it. And so as spectators as well, for the rest of the class, they become spectators or audience in the conversation session that we have. And they also get to engage through the chat box, or if they want to ask another question after the resource speaker has shared his or her answers, then they are enjoying to join as well. And it really becomes a dynamic and lively discussion. And it's really unique to see it, to this kind of class in physics and earth science and the RRR, because these subjects are usually those that give you the facts, the knowledge, parang pak, ganyan, binibigay lahat ng mga information sa kanila. And we really do not pay attention to what is beyond what is beyond the competencies given to us. Kasi we always think na pag natuhog na natin yung competencies, that's it. Pag nabigay na natin yung lesson, that's it. So we really don't think of challenging the learners to think even more, to think deeply. So again, as I said, it requires an understanding of the concept for them to participate in the conversation and compels them to reflect on their knowledge as well. So here are some of the questions that we shared to the students who included in the weekly presentations namin. So what would the world look like without directions? What would a world without directions look like? Sorry for the grammatical error. So what would a world without directions look like when talking about vectors and scalars? Why do we need to look for other planets that might harbor life when we talk about the nature, interior, and of planet Earth? How can we ensure that our measurements are the same wherever you are in the planet? Okay, so that talks about the concept of institutionalizing standards in measurements, and you look at the history of the different units of measurements and systems of measurements at that. So standardization of measurements. Also have in the movie Godzilla versus Kong, the Earth is said to be hollow on the inside. Do you think this is plausible, and why or why not? So this last question elicited elicited a positive response among the students because many of them can relate. They saw the movie and they too were asking the same question: is it really plausible to have a hollow Earth model of planet Earth? And so in our discussion, this actually happened last week, and it's really interesting because you get to know the prior knowledge of the student when it comes to seismic waves, how earthquakes are detected on other sides of the planet, the evidence that we have to know that there really is a solid interior of planet Earth and not hollow Earth as presented in the movie Kong versus Godzilla versus Kong. And so this conversation, these information would not have happened. These information would not have been put into light if we did not ask these questions in the first place. And that really highlights the importance of designing a conversational model of synchronous sessions. And another one would be, is life possible in other places in the universe? We're talking about the qualities that, or the conditions that make life on planet Earth possible. Okay, so is life possible in other places in the universe? And it elicited a lot of responses because our learners, our Gen Z learners, are surprisingly deep thinkers. No, some of us may have some prejudice of Gen Z learners as they have low attention span, which means that they don't arrive at a well thought of conclusion because they don't have the time or the energy or the interest to do so. But that is just a stereotype that does not apply to a lot of our learners, the majority of our learners, because they're surprisingly deep thinkers. Not maybe in a way that we are thinking about, not in our standards, siguro in our time, but they have a different way of making connections with the lessons in our classes. So they are surprisingly deep thinkers. They are reflective. I can say that the students that I've come across with are very reflective. And when I ask them these questions in class, they have varied answers and very interesting answers at that. So it's really interesting. And so another thing that we learn is that when we allow our learners to communicate using the language or dialect they're comfortable with, then they can express their thoughts more effectively. And I think this is a fact, not just in the sciences, but in other subjects as well. When we allow the students to speak in Filipino, if they are not comfortable with speaking in English, or if they cannot express their thoughts as fluently in English, we can allow them to speak in Filipino, but we still maintain that as teachers, you have to speak in English because we set an example as academicians or as communicators. Okay, so we speak in English, but we allow them to speak in Filipino. And what I actually noticed is that when I consistently speak in English, and if I veer the conversation away from a Filipino means of communication and into an English one, then the conversation naturally follows into an English means of communication. So nagiging nire-reflect ngayon ng learners kung ano yung ginagawa natin as teachers. So if we speak in Filipino, then they speak in Filipino as well. But if you really push them to speak in English, then they will really speak English subconsciously. eventually. We also noticed that when a learner gets it wrong, when the answer of the learner is wrong the first time, then the conversational nature of the session makes it easier for the teacher to ask follow-up questions and clarificatory questions. And this allows the learner to reach that, tama pala, tama sir, tama ka sir, tama pala, ito pala dapat yung sinabi ko kanina. And so that is such a great feeling as a teacher to guide the student to the correct way of framing the lesson and the correct understanding of the lesson. So yeah, I know you know what I'm talking about pag sinabi natin yung aha moment ng mga students. Also, learners appreciate it if the teacher does not make them feel stupid when they get the answer wrong. And as former students, we really know the feeling of when when a teacher makes us feel bad about getting the answer wrong the first time. So this conversational nature of synchronous sessions allow us to be more sensitive to their responses, sensitive to their emotions and to the possible repercussions of what has happened in class. So if a student got it wrong the first time, we just encourage them, that's okay. It's okay to get it wrong as long as you know how to do it right, or as long as you know that it's wrong and there is this correct way of framing your thought eventually. So that's the key, no? In conversations, you have different opinions, you have different views, and the purpose of bringing many people together is for them to fill the gaps of knowledge. That's exactly the point of having a conversation, to know which one is wrong, which concepts are wrong, which concepts are right, and to see if we have some sort of common ground to move forward. Okay, so that's the idea of having a conversational model of synchronous session. And based on the responses of the student, based on the evaluation of the students last semester, we can really see the effects of changing the way we do our synchronous sessions. Students were overwhelmingly positive when we designed our synchronous sessions around questions, and when we became more interactive in class, when we asked a lot of questions, when we engage the students to think really deeply about the lesson that they have learned. And this pays a lot of dividends eventually, because we are developing scientists and leaders in the academe that are capable of thinking beyond what is given to them by the content, and are capable of establishing connections that are not necessarily given in the limited time that we have in the online classroom. Okay, so these are just some of the remarks that the students have given to us in the last semester. And so to end my session, to end my sharing, I would like to share some keynotes on making conversational sessions more effective and more lively. Of course, you have to sprinkle some humor. It is really challenging for a lot of us to become humorous in online settings, more so in the face-to-face setting. But it really helps if we can lighten up the mood in our classes, especially if you're teaching something heavy, like calculus or physics or research. So these little moments of humor when you sing a particular phrase that has a connection with a particular song. So parang yung lyric ng song is nakita doon sa presentation, and then you sing it instead of saying it, makes them smile a little, no? And that's good because we want them to feel less isolated in this online setup. So if you can sprinkle some humor, you can sing some songs. If you'd like, you can make corny dad jokes if you have some. But try to make humorous remarks. Always process the response as well of the learners before asking follow-up questions, because we want the learners, we want to validate the effort of the learner in responding to the question. So kahit mali yung response ng learner, that's okay. We still have to process it. Bakit kaya yun nasabi ng learner? What made the learner think of it like that? So how did the learner frame it as such? And so by processing the response of the learner, we are actually looking at the metacognitive aspect of the response. So thinking about what made them think like that. So you process the response, whether it is right or wrong. Be attentive to silence as well. If you've been in the teaching profession for quite some time, you are very much aware that silence not necessarily means that the learners are not listening, but it is an indication that it's either the learners are taking the time to reflect, or they do not understand the lesson at all. Okay, so do not take it against the let's not take it against our students if they are silent in class, or if their cameras are turned off, or if their microphones are turned off during the session. That's very understandable. Gestures help a lot in making conversation dynamic and lively. So if you can position your camera like I am right now, I'm doing right now, if you can position your camera so that that the students can see your gestures, you are being very dynamic in your discussion, then that really helps a lot in making the 1 hour synchronous session dynamic and lively and not at all boring. Steer the conversation back to the topic very quickly. So as you can expect, conversations can veer off tangents very easily. So it's also a skill that we need to develop now. We have to steer the conversation back to the topic at hand. And if you have to take you have to be mindful if your jokes or your side comments are veering too far off from the topic. So that self-awareness is also important. So steer the conversation back to the topic very quickly. Next would be periodically check the attentiveness of the learners. If you make a joke, okay, you expect the students to laugh out of PT siguro because your joke is very corny. But periodically checking the smiles or the smirks of the student can help you get the nonverbal cues, the very limited nonverbal cues that we need in adjusting the pacing of our lessons accordingly. Okay, so periodically check the attentiveness of the students. So you can ask them to, okay, did you understand it? Thumbs up if you understand and understood it. Thumbs up, or shake your hands muna, 1, 2, 3, shake your hands up. So yun, simple exercises can help. Be relatable as well. If you might be surprised, but a lot of your experiences might also be relatable to our students. So you might be thinking the age gap maybe between the teacher and the student might not make the conversation not relatable. But you might be surprised, no? Maraming mga relatable experiences yung mga teachers natin na nakaka-add ng value doon sa conversation. So try to be relatable, share personal anecdotes, personal experiences, and encourage your students to share their personal anecdotes as well. Try to stay updated with the latest trends, memes, and references, because it is also one way of engaging our students to get their attention and to keep them interested to our lessons. And of course, the most important note that I have to share with you is smile and laugh as much as you can. Okay, staring at a person is easier when that person presents a pleasant personality. So if you can, no, not necessarily, not just if you can, you must try to smile and laugh as much as you can, because these learners are most likely not in a good place, and not necessarily depressed, no, per se, but they're really not in they might not be in the right mindset na to be stressed at this very moment. So being being a lively, cheerful, and approachable teacher and presenting a pleasant personality really helps our students to lessen the burden of the challenges of the online learning setup. So those are just some of the notes that I can share with you in our synchronous session in the previous semester and in current semester. So let me end with this quote by Margaret Wheatley, an academician and an author. Conversation is the way that humans have always thought together. In conversation, we discover shared meaning. It is the primal human organizing tool. In all of our design of meetings, engagement, planning, or whatever, if you're building conversation into the process, you will not benefit from the collective power and wisdom of humans thinking together. And so I hope that we can successfully integrate the power of conversations in our synchronous session, so that the gap between our students, or the feeling of being isolated in our respective homes, becomes less and less apparent. So thank you, and I'm ready to answer if you have any questions.
Thank you very much to Sir Jason, but unfortunately, we do not have any more time for questions. So if you do have questions for Sir Jason about this session, Sir Jason, could you please drop down your email in the chat so they could ask their questions over there?
Sure. So my email is here at hadu.edu.ph. So I am very much willing to answer your questions now. Let me just, can you answer this very quickly, Sir Ryan? My questions is sa chat box. Is it okay? Very quickly lang, 1
Kasi
minute.
okay, one minute
Okay.
lang.
What challenge you experienced during conversation session? How do you overcome these challenges? As I said kanina, no, there are students that get it wrong the first time. It's very challenging to lead that student to the right answer. That's the primary concern that I had, leading the student to the right answer. And how to overcome it? Well, I just asked several questions, try to translate it in Filipino or in the local dialect in Bisaya until they get the right answer eventually. Okay, so yun. So thank you so much for the positive response in the chat box. If you have any questions or clarifications, feel free to email me. So I
So
apologize
once
if I
again,
extended. Thank you,
okay
Sir
lang.
Ryan. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Once again, thank you very much to Sir Jason, and thank you also to our participants for attending this session. Our next session is entitled Stalking Students in a G Suite School, Teacher Monitoring of Group Formative Tasks, and it will begin at 3:30 p.m.